Good morning, you guys. Your boy Bill Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the entire basketball community. Um, the NBA season has just kicked off, you guys, and this Friday we're gonna. I'm sorry, this Thursday we're gonna discuss, all the games that have pretty much been happening, this week as we start the 2020-21 season, and we got a list of basketball games gonna happen on Christmas Day. So we're gonna review those games, and also, we're gonna discuss a lot of the stuff that's going on in more of the basketball, guys. So basketball's on its way, man, and we're ready to kick things off. Gonna give you guys a lot of stuff to talk about as we get ready for another journey towards the NBA championship. So our new time is going to be for Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central Time on the eve of Christmas Eve. So we're going to make sure to note that time this week for Thursday at 9 p.m. Central Time. So with that being said, let's get down to business here, shall we? So I wanted to do this video for a bit of a while, but I wanted to do something about Wilt Chamberlain, but in a different type of light. And today, for this historical perspective video, we're going to discuss about something that has not been talked about a lot, and that is the list of coaches that Wilt Chamberlain has played with throughout his career. Okay, now we already know how great of a player Wilt Chamberlain is. I mean, his accomplishments and his physical specimen, speaks endless. This guy was probably one of the most athletically gifted basketball players of all time. No doubt about it. But the thing that people tend to jump on the most is that how many times he's lost against in the NBA Finals, that he's money opportunities to win championships. Okay, that the fact that he's only got two, and he should have had at least about five or six. Now, I think people have jumped on that a little bit too much, and they sometimes don't look at what transpired during that time. Now, the Celtic dynasty had a lot to do with it, no doubt about that. But there's much more to the story that people don't tend to look at, and they just look at everything at face value instead of looking at the actual facts of what happened during that period of time. So, this is a video for those people that don't do the due diligence about what happened during the 60s. Okay, now as far as Will Chamberlain is concerned, okay, the big problem with Will Chamberlain in terms of stability is that throughout his 14 years in the NBA, he has had to play with eight different coaches. Let me say it again: eight different coaches during Wilt's 14 years in the NBA. All right, think about that for a moment. You playing through different coaches, various styles, various systems, different codes. You know what I'm saying? All those things played a huge role into why Wilt Chamberlain didn't win as many championships as he should have. All right. And I made sure to do my research about this because this is something that people don't tend to talk about a lot. Now, when people throw at me and say, "Well, if that's the case, then it's up to Wilt to adjust to all the coaching patterns." Well, here's the thing: there's so many to adjust and to learn from. He never had the continuity with one particular coach that really got the best out of Will Chamberlain. All right, there's a reason why the Bill Russell and Red Auerbach relationship worked as well as it did because they were able to spend so many years together, winning championships, learning, developing relationships, learning a system that basically worked for both of them. Okay, and for Wilt's side of things, he never had that continuity with one particular coach. So, with no further ado, I actually wrote down in my research the eight different coaches that he played with throughout his career, dating back to his rookie year. All right, when he basically started in San Francisco. Okay, I'm sorry, not in San Francisco, but in Philadelphia. At that time, they were called the Philadelphia Warriors. Okay, so his rookie year. Okay, his first coach was by the name of Neil Johnston, a guy that basically was coming off of a career-ending injury and began his coaching career coaching Wilt Chamberlain for the very first time. According to the research that I kind of discovered of that time, Neil Johnston was too overwhelmed of the mystique of Wilt Chamberlain and pretty much got overwhelmed by his presence. All right, and the San Francisco Warriors, unfortunately, unfortunately stood not much of a chance against those Celtics during that time. So unfortunately, that didn't work out too long for him, as he just only coached for 2 seasons. Then, in a big surprising move, the Philadelphia Warriors actually hired legendary coach Frank Maguire. All right. Frank Maguire, the great Frank Maguire, who spent all the years at St. John's University in North Carolina, who won a national championship with North Carolina after pulling off the big upset against Kansas. Okay. Now, the surprising part about this is that Frank Maguire only spent 1 season with in Philadelphia. All right, and pretty much he helped lead. He pretty much was the guy who oversaw Wilt Chamberlain's night of scoring 100 points against the New York Knicks, and in that same year, pretty much helped coach Wilt Chamberlain to score 50.4 points per game. Just a monumental accomplishment. But when the Warriors began their move to San Francisco, Frank Maguire pretty much resigned. All right, he resigned because he did not like coaching in the West Coast, and he ended up just staying home. And after only spending about 2 years in public relations, he returned back to basketball coaching South Carolina in 1964. Now think about that for a moment. If Wilt Chamberlain had the legendary Frank Maguire for at least 5 to 6 seasons at best, he probably would have won at least 3 more championships because Frank Maguire's approach to coaching was top notch. All right. So when Frank Maguire pretty much was not moving to San Francisco, but another coach by the name of Bob Federick took over as the Warriors coach, and only won 31 games that year. On that 1 year before he got replaced. All right. So this was between in the early '60s. He's already been through 3 different coaches. All right. Then his fourth coach came in by the name of Alex Hannum, who's in the Hall of Fame. All right, he spent 3 years coaching San Francisco and helped improve the team in the first year by helping them get to the NBA Finals and eventually losing to the Boston Celtics. Right, but only after spending one season with Alex Hannum. All right, Wilt Chamberlain was traded back to Philadelphia as the Philadelphia 76ers were finally established as a legitimate basketball franchise. All right, and so when Wilt Chamberlain returned back to Philadelphia, all right, he was being coached by his fifth man by the name of Dolph Schayes. Dolph Schayes is one of the great players in NBA history, known for his physical toughness by playing in 337 consecutive games, which was making him the original Iron Man of the NBA. The problem was Dolph, Dolph, uh, Dolph Schayes' coaching style was too soft for Wilt Chamberlain, and Wilt pretty much barely listened to him, and he didn't really like Dolph Schayes as much. But in his defense, I will say in Dolph Schayes' defense, all right, he did let them to the NBA Finals pretty much back in 1966. I should back in 1966, he pretty much led them to the conference final before ultimately losing again to the Boston Celtics. But after after Dolph Schayes was basically resigned from coach, Alex Handel came back as Wilt Chamberlain's coach in Philadelphia and coached him for at least 2 years, and then ultimately in the 1966-67 season, all right, Wilt Chamberlain finally you know Wilt Chamberlain finally ended the dynasty by defeating the Celtics and winning on the NBA championship. And the big difference of Alex Hannum's coaching style compared to Dolph Schayes' coaching style was Alex Hannum was pretty much a never back down, you know, general light type of coach that Wilt Chamberlain pretty much respected. All right, that's the big thing. Wilt Chamberlain pretty much never had those kind of coaches around him. If he had Frank Maguire or Alex Hannum in longer than just 2 years, all right, he probably would have won at least 3 to 5 championships at the most, rather than the 2 that he had. All right. But once again, it shows to you how great the Celtics teams were in the '60s, all right, before '67. So then, after spending 2 more seasons in with the Philadelphia 76ers. Wilt Chamberlain was pretty much traded to the Los Angeles Lakers when uh, when he basically began to team up with the two great superstars of Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. On paper, this was a team that was supposed to be favored, but as I did my video about the '69 finals, the Lakers team was basically the sum of its parts because when when sixth coach Butch Van Vertikop was Wilt's coach, those two guys hated each other, literally hated each other. And it showed itself in the '69 finals when Wilt Chamberlain injured his knee midway through the fourth quarter and had to ice it to try to get the knee going again. And when he was fit and ready to play, Butch Van Vertikop, once again, like I told you, he pretty much said, "We don't need you. We're doing fine without you." And they ended up losing the title in the last final duel between Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell during the '60s. All right. And after Butch Van Vertikop resigned as coach because he was going to get fired on the spot, Joe Mullaney became his coach for two more seasons in 1969 through 1971 and did not produce a second championship. It wasn't until 1972 when former Celtic legend Bill Sharman became coach and led the Lakers to 33 straight wins and another NBA championship for him. But the big difference of that was that Bill Sharman was able to force Wilt Chamberlain to focus more on the defensive side of the ball and rebounding. And we got to see a lot of Wilt Chamberlain in terms of his dominance on the defensive end. Okay. And even though in that 72 he was still averaging representative around 14 points per game, his rebounding was up. His blocks were up. If they would have kept the stats of block shots at that time, he would have been the league leader in block shots. That's how dominant they were. All right. And that was pretty much it. He pretty much coached. We had 8 different coaches in 14 years and only produced 2 championships. Now, let's sit back and think about this. All right. If you're a player and you had to play for different coaches in various spots, all right, during your Hall of Fame career. It does play a role about how you're being used on the basketball court. There's no denying that. All right, and people could talk about it saying that Wilt Chamberlain lost all these final records. If you don't do your research and do your due diligence about why that was the issue for Wilt Chamberlain at the time, you really are doing yourself a disservice about in learning how things were in the game at that time. Okay, and also the other factor was is that the Celtics were just a vastly superior team than any other dynasty ever seen in the history of sports. I mean, those Celtics had like immortal teams. All right, even how great Wilt Chamberlain was, he couldn't win any of those championships by himself, and he had to have the talent like the Hal Greers, you know what I mean, the Billy Cunninghams of the world, and those kind of players to pretty much help them get over the hump and winning those championships. No denying that. But my point is that listen, the amount of coaches that he's had to deal with here, you had to always have to constantly change your style, change your approach year after year after year. And it does get frustrating. If he had listen, if he had Bill Sharman long term, in his earlier days, okay, Wilt Chamberlain would have won at least a few more rings. Same with Alex Hannum, same with Frank Maguire. All right, those 3 coaches built were Wilt Chamberlain's best coaches for him during his playing career because they were able to be strong and firm with them, and as a result, they got the best out of Wilt Chamberlain. All right, so the bottom line is, you guys, do yourself a favor. Do your research, do your due diligence to figure out what was going on during that different period of time in the '60s and in the '70s, and then you make your analysis of that. I did that. I did this video for the specific reason because people who say that Wilt Chamberlain should have won more or say he's the biggest loser of all time, you're really doing yourself a huge negative to yourself if you don't research about what was going on during that period of time. And I will say in Wolf's defense, he did exactly what his coaches wanted him to do. It's just that during his playing days, the Celtics were just a vastly superior team than any other team in NBA history. And when you look at Wilt and during that time, his the amount of coaches he had to deal with, it played a role about why he lost so many times to those damn Boston Celtics, and why he only has 2 championships on his resume instead of at least 5 or 6. That has to play a role. I mean, you cannot dispute that at all. And so, for anyone that tries to, denigrate Wilt Chamberlain, what Wilt Chamberlain did in his basketball career, you need to do yourself a favor. Stop talking basketball or do your research, and then come back and talk to me. So that's just pretty much my 2 cents. You let me know what you think in the comment section below. And with that, I'm out. Peace.